So you've gone through 10 or so hours of political intrigue on Earth, and it's finally time to go to space and shoot down some aliens. But before that, you want to see if your ships actually have a fighting chance. So you return to main menu, open skirmish, import your save file ships, choose the alien ship class you want to fight, then before starting, tick the enable tutorial checkbox. And here's the so-called tutorial. Just windows pointing to UI elements. Next. That's it? Nothing related to controls. Okay, let's check the codex if there's more info. Alright, so for this video, I'll give you a quick overview of the controls for space combat. First off, camera. You have the usual WASD, which pans the XY plane. So while looking at the default view, A and D are left and right, aka moving along the X-axis. And W and S is forward and back, moving along the Y-axis. Holding the left click and moving the mouse also allows you to pan in those directions. There's also Z and X for zoom in and out respectively, which can be a bit annoying as we shall see later. You can also use the scroll wheel for zooming. At this point you might ask, wait, what about the elevation or the Z axis? There's the middle mouse button. Hold it to pan in the X and Z axis, with up and down replacing left click's Y axis movement. And finally, there's holding down right click, which is the more familiar mouse look movement in FPS games. This also changes your origin and orientation, allowing you to change the view to any position with a combination of all of the previous movement options. Now, to move your ships. Terra Invicta space combat is real-time with pause. All orders like setting targets, retracting radiators, etc. will be executed in real time, except for the movement. In line with the game's hard sci-fi theme, spaceship movement is done through a series of turns and boosts, and those can be assigned on the waypoints you see in front of your ships. Each waypoint represents the expected position of a ship every minute. This is based on current momentum and the turns and boosts done in the current and previous waypoints. The initial waypoint represents the initial momentum of your fleet entering the battlefield, and in the current build, it cannot be modified. To set the ship's actions during a waypoint, hover your mouse over it. This shows the default mouse drag action, moving along the XY plane. Clicking and holding the left mouse button will turn the arrows orange, and moving your mouse towards those arrows will make the game try to move the waypoint towards that direction in that plane. Emphasis on try. As I said, movement is done through a series of turns and boosts. With a default left mouse drag, you tell the game to calculate the turn and boost to get there. If it can't, it will stop. So here, if I try to drag it all the way to the left, it stops because the ship doesn't have enough acceleration to go further in that minute. Compare that to this later game ship that I snuck in here with far greater acceleration. As you can see, it can go farther in 1 minute of turns and boosts. Now, the color of the line tells you the actions the ship is doing at that point. Green for nothing, yellow for turn, red for boost. Let's see this in action. Oh, and yeah, time control is a fairly basic real-time with pause fare, space for pause, numbers for speed, both of which you're probably already using in the main game. Fast forwarding to the waypoint, here's the turn. And the boost. Notice that when a ship is executing movements to a waypoint, you can't change it anymore. This is probably why the first waypoint can't be changed. Another thing you haven't noticed yet from my keyboard and mouse overlay, right-click resets a waypoint to its original state. That said, just a quick warning, changing an early waypoint will reset all of the succeeding waypoints. So it may be better to use earlier waypoints more and avoid wasting time on setting up elaborate movements, which will later just be overwritten. Apart from the default left mouse click, you have other options. First are the turns. Holding Z, X, or C before clicking and dragging allows you to set the yaw, pitch, and roll respectively. In these turn controls, the highlight aren't arrows, but a broken circle. To set the turn, you move your cursor around the waypoint, and the waypoint will point itself towards your cursor. That's for yaw and pitch. For the roll, the right side of the waypoint will be the one aligned to your cursor. You can set any combination of rotations and the game will calculate the most efficient turn to achieve that. Say you try to set what some mistakenly call a barrel roll. You'll see the turn time increase until I reach the 180-degree mark, which will then go lower. Because at that point, instead of rolling right, the ship will instead choose to roll efficiently to the left. Now that we know how to set the turn, time for the boost, which is E. This time, two arrows appear, and moving your mouse towards the direction of an arrow will assign more or less boost. Be careful with assigning negative boosts. If you push too hard on the negative, it will assume that you want to go to the opposite direction of the turns you made, and will reverse them accordingly. Now that we know how to set the turns and boosts, we can now learn about the limitations of the waypoint commands. A waypoint segment can have one of the following. Default, which is no movement. Next is just turns, so just yellow. Or alternatively, just boost, which is red. A turn and a boost, which is yellow followed by red. Or you can use the opposite, which is a boost, then a turn, red and yellow. And finally, a turn, then a boost, then an extra turn. Any other combination, and the game will override your commands to simplify it to one of the other combinations. So if you want more intricate movement, you'll have to wait for the next waypoint. And one more thing, there seems to be no collision damage unless you order a ship to ram an enemy. Otherwise, ships will just clip through each other. However, if the game detects that two units are about to collide or will be too close to each other, they will override their waypoints and try to avoid one another. The initial collision detected is noted by a blue segment. In other words, if you keep your ships too close to provide point defense screens, check them once in a while to see if the collision detection has changed their waypoints. Let's wrap up this video by talking about the most frustrating thing about moving ships. To do that, we'll have to go back to the humble left click. First off, it has a counterpart in the YZ plane, and that's the Q button. As you can see, it's for climbing and descending. So in airplane terms, left click would be your rudder and Q would be your elevators. But it's not quite as simple as it seems. Remember that the game calculates the optimal combination of turns and thrusts to move towards where you drag the waypoint to. So unless your ship is moving exactly on the respective plane, using the left click or Q will not just change the relative yaw or pitch, but will also usually rotate on the other axis to point the ship towards the target. Sometimes that's expected, other times it can be a bit confusing, especially if you're like me who's not an aerobatics or spaceship maneuvering expert. For example, here we're moving on the waypoint's XY plane, so using the left click doesn't change the Z orientation. But in this waypoint, we're clearly not on the YZ plane. So moving around with a Q will cause it to roll rather than just pitch. The extra rotation also produces a potentially frustrating side effect. That is, it will change the orientation of the waypoint. So the next command will no longer be on the same plane. Say you wanted to climb here, but it doesn't look quite right, so you release the mouse button and change the camera angle. Trying to climb again would now put your waypoint dragging on a different plane compared to before. So you're left with having to reset the waypoint before trying again. There's also the cherry on top. Setting boost also does the same thing. So your aerobatic moves can also be overridden once you apply boost. One possible solution here would be to have another modifier, say shift or control key, that will lock all of the other axes when used together with the commands. Or at least return the waypoint to its original orientation with a post-boost rotation budget. I won't talk about the rest of the UI, but I'll quickly cover the bottom ship info related to movement. First is the ship's current velocity in meters per second. Then there's the maximum acceleration in Gs, or in this case milli-Gs. And the delta V budget in kilometers per second. The expected delta V that will be used to get to a waypoint can be seen on the top of the waypoints, with a number in the brackets telling you how much will be left after that waypoint. And that's it for this basic tutorial. There's stuff like padlocking, but with what you've learned in the past 10 or so minutes, you should be able to figure out the rest on your own. Alright, here's how to access the in-game movement tutorial. Just don't click on the ships and instead click the next step until you get to the camera and movement tutorial part. I still went through with this video because I found the info there kinda lacking, so there.